Welcome to the Generation Hustle podcast, the show that explores the world of business, entrepreneurship, and culture, all centered around the millennial. I'm your co-host Amin, alongside my buddy Sheriston. On today's episode, we talk about a topic that many of us have probably not experienced, but we've seen its unfortunate growth within society. We're talking about poverty and its intersection with technology. Let's face it, many companies do not invest in improving the lives of those less fortunate due to monetary gains and the fact that many founders build around problems they understand, and poverty is generally not one of those. To help break down this topic, we sit down with Jimmy Chen, founder of an amazing company called Propel. Propel is on a mission towards building software for low-income Americans who are often overlooked by traditional tech innovation. Their Fresh EBT app has helped over 3 million users and allows users to check their food stamp balance and find stores that accept food stamps. Users can also track their spending. They have an amazing investor list including the likes of Kevin Durant, Serena Williams, and Andreessen Horowitz, to name a few. Jimmy also shares his journey to becoming an entrepreneur and his personal story about how financial hardship motivated him to build out Propel. We're hoping to inspire you after listening to this episode and learn more about an important topic we tend to neglect. So let's get right into it.
Hey Jimmy, how's it going?
Good. How are you two?
Great. How's everything going on your end?
It's been a busy week, but things are going all right.
How's everything with quarantine?
It's weird. I live in New York City, and so here in Brooklyn, we had some pretty rough times in the early days in like April and May, and now things are lightening up right as the rest of the country is getting worse. So it's just strange to see.
For sure, yeah, it's kind of all over the place. We don't really know where it's headed, but hopefully it's headed downwards, right?
Where are you two based?
We're in Toronto.
Cool. That was very cute that you guys said at the same time.
My name is Sheriston, by the way, Jimmy. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. It's nice to see you guys.
Sweet. Thank you. Yeah, Jimmy, thank you so much for being part of this. Your company's doing amazing things. So we really wanted to share with our listeners and, just make sure that people know what Propel does and who you guys are all about.
Great. Happy to have a conversation. Curious where you found us. Do you remember?
Yeah. So honestly, I was just doing some social, I was on Google search. I was looking for companies that have amazing social causes. I'm an avid reader of TechCrunch as well. So I had read about you guys prior to.
Cool.
And so when you guys did that $12.8 million round. It just kind of fit in naturally. And then I just gave you guys a cold message, I guess. And then luckily you guys reached out, right? So that's amazing.
Great.
Sweet. So let's just start it off. Let's just go into your journey in terms of, let's say, post-graduation. You went to Stanford, and after that, you worked as a product manager for both LinkedIn and later Facebook, obviously very well-known, prominent tech companies. So you did your undergrad in symbolic systems. So one, explain what symbolic systems are to individuals that might not know. And was it your intent to kind of work in product management, or was it kind of something that just came out of maybe interest, or you just gave it a shot?
First of all, thank you guys for having me on the show. Symbolic systems is a major at Stanford that's sort of a combination of cognitive science and computer science. And we used to joke that the main thing you're signing up for with symbolic systems is explaining what it is for the rest of your life. It's not a major that other schools have and has complicated sounding words, and who knows what that really even means. But what it really means, and my experience and why I was excited about the major, is that it's like a computer science major in the sense that you learn how to code, you take the basics of computer science and learn how to build things, but that you mash that up with other interdisciplinary fields like psychology and philosophy and linguistics. And that allows you to think about computers not as just a computing tool, but as a machine that's used by a human. This idea of for people who want to build pieces of technology that are really well suited to the unique ways that humans interact and the ways that humans perceive information, you've got to have a basis in not just the computer science part, but also in psychology and in the understanding of humans. So that's sort of why I was excited about the major. I honestly did not know what product management even was right around until about when I graduated. It was actually, I remember there's a class that I took when I was a junior. It's a project-based course called CS 210. And it was a partnership-based class where we were doing projects. We were like groups of software engineers doing a project that was done over the course of 2 quarters. And as any student in computer science who's taking these kind of project-based classes knows, there is the work that you do in coding to actually build the thing, but then there has to be someone on the team who's doing the coordination work.
Right. Yeah.
It's like not very exciting. Usually it's like writing emails to the professor and like making the PowerPoint presentation and like making sure that there's a timeline and people are committed to like doing various things. And I found myself like, I mean, I was an engineer. Like I was also like pulling my weight as a coder on the project, but I found myself defaulting into doing all of the administrative stuff that no one else wanted to go do. And my professor later told me that there's a job called product manager where you do essentially just that. And so I wasn't necessarily sure that I wanted to do it, but I found that it was something that I was always drawn to, the people side of solving problems in technology, and found that product management was actually a really great fit for that.
Sweet. And I think a lot of people learn about product management much later into their careers. I know maybe it's a different kind of scenario with a lot of millennials or younger generation, I would say, in university right now. I think product management is like the cool thing to do. But I remember when I was in university as well, until maybe up till 4th year, I had never heard of a product manager role. And I've worked in like tech for like basically practically my whole career. Up to that point, I even volunteered at like accelerators. All I knew was coding and like administrative sales guys, marketing guys. But product managers have a huge impact on the future of any business. So that's really cool. I mean, it kind of happened organically for you then.
Yeah, I think like one of the things that I learned like towards the end of my college and into my career is just like the number of different careers that you can have in technology that are not just like software engineering roles, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think I fully understood that as an undergrad.
Yeah, and I totally agree with you. There's so many opportunities out there. So now kind of describe, you're in the field now, you're working. And so describe to me what it's like to actually work as a PM at LinkedIn and at Facebook, and what it's like working in that super innovative environment. And how does it compare to like maybe a smaller tech startup?
I really enjoyed my time at both LinkedIn and Facebook. I was at both companies. I joined both companies when they were already established organizations and major brands and really strong businesses. But I was there through the IPOs of both companies, where they sort of really stepped into becoming, truly a large company that's publicly traded and has all the visibility that those types of companies have. And just learned so much from being surrounded by a bunch of peers and a bunch of people who are just building incredible things there. I think, both companies treat product management in kind of a similar way, which is this idea of like, you can have more innovation if you really subset the company and you have these smaller teams that have the autonomy to be able to create things and define their own roadmap and set their own goals and right, to move things forward in their own areas. And so as a product manager, I really enjoyed the like pseudo entrepreneurial task of owning a product area and trying to move it forward and using the resources that I had available to make that happen. I think some people talk about product management as like, oh, you're the CEO of a feature, CEO of a function. Turns out that doesn't compare to being a real CEO. Turns out being a real CEO is much harder. It comes with a whole different set of challenges that I've since learned in the past 6 or so years since starting a company and becoming a real CEO. But I do think, and like broadly speaking, I think there's just like not that much you can do in corporate America that is incredible preparation for starting a company. A lot of the stuff is just learning by trial and error and learning by doing. And so while I do think I gained useful skills as a product manager, learn how to prioritize, learn how to think about consumers, and to like integrate all the different functions that you have to do, whether it's between the design team and the data team and the engineering team. Those are all useful, but at the end of the day, most of what I learned about being a founder, I've learned by being a founder.
It's all about that execution, right? You just learn over time how to adapt and how to adjust. So that's awesome. That's awesome. And so what were your kind of biggest takeaways? Like, there's a lot of individuals wanting to obviously get into the PM industry. But again, as you described it, it's a lot different when you work at a larger scale company versus a smaller scale company. So what were the biggest takeaways for you working at a Facebook and LinkedIn, and how have they kind of influenced your work today?
I think there are lots of things that I learned that have been helpful for my work today, and also a few things that I've had to unlearn that have not been helpful, or that were like patterns or habits that you do at big companies that are just not appropriate for starting a thing from scratch. And so happy to talk about both of those. I mean, on the positive side, I think just like cadence of execution is the core thing. Just like the expectation that like we're going to get stuff done and the product is going to get better every day is, I think, like it gets baked into sort of your expectation about what your job is and what your like how you think about your work in a way that I think is really helpful. And I think like, you know, even larger software companies like LinkedIn and Facebook both have sort of the expectation that like we're going to have this roadmap, and the products that we build are not stagnant. Like they're going to be changing on a regular basis, and we're going to try to be constantly making them new and improved, right? And I think that's kind of in contrast to companies that are, you know, that have a set product. The core thing that they create is set, and they're spending all their time and energy on trying to market the product or trying to sell it to more people, right? And that I think there's a really helpful and to me really exciting part of the culture of Silicon Valley is that the core product is never finished. The core mission is never done. There's always more that you can do to take that to the next level. And so bringing that, I think, to the startup world is a really helpful way to think about like, you know, it's not that we're just going to like invent some new thing and throw it into the world and then just spend the next 5 years selling it. It is that like the core product we are building, you know, needs to constantly be evolving.
For sure. Yeah. And I like that a lot. Just bringing that mentality of constant improvement to a new tech startup, it provides a different perspective, especially to people who are just starting up. So now it's 2014 and you've just finished working with Facebook and you're building Propel. So maybe you can give us a little bit of context on what led you to Propel and where the inspiration for that came from.
So one of the things that, well, maybe just to step back a bit, even before my time in university, I grew up in a loving and supportive household. It was mostly middle class, but had a series of financial shocks and financial hardships, I think like most American families do at some point. Was fortunate to go to Stanford on a financial needs scholarship, and always sort of carried with that, as I think like a lot of kids who grow up without having a whole lot of money, like carry that inside of themselves as a mindset in a way that they think about the world and they think about their own career, they think about taking a risk, all those things. And I started to like reflect on how that like my background, even though I don't consider it a rare background per se, was still pretty different than that of most people who work in tech, most people who were my classmates at Stanford, that a lot of people like came from very well-off situations. And that furthermore, this idea that people solve the problems that they understand, and they build products fundamentally for themselves. And I think that's very true at LinkedIn and at Facebook, that like the core way that people generate ideas of like what's a good product, what's a bad product is like, do I want to use this product? So you are really thinking about yourself as the engineer, as the product manager, whoever, as the core user for the product. And I did not see, you know, my parents, when my father lost his job, very well reflected among the people who were starting software companies in Silicon Valley. And then you go take a look at the stats and you see that this is true across the board. There are 40 million Americans who get food stamp benefits. The vast majority of them have smartphones and access to the internet, but not a lot of them are like in the Bay Area starting software companies or are working as product managers at Facebook. And so what I came to realize is that there are lots of people out there, people who don't have the financial means. Often their smartphones are not as useful. right? Yes, they get to use these like mass market apps that are made for everyone. But if like when I was a 26-year-old male who lived in San Francisco, there were so many tech companies out there that were building apps specifically for me, right? Like I was the core customer for like so many different startups out there trying to like, to give you like a way to do laundry from your phone or a way to call, to get your parking done for you. Very sort of like things where really I was the core customer. And I started thinking about, what about all the people that are not like me? What about all the people in the United States that are struggling financially, that live in a different state, and that just don't look like the people who work at Facebook, like who's building software for them? I found an organization called Blue Ridge Labs, part of the Robin Hood Foundation in New York City, that really sharpened my thinking on this and had a very similar view of the world and of this opportunity that, right. In 2014, the technology industry is not doing all it can to solve real social problems. And it's because the demographics of technology do not reflect the demographics of the world at large, the people who use technology. And so that is why I did the fellowship at the Blue Ridge Labs back in 2014, focused on, I didn't know it was going to be a company at the time, and I didn't know exactly what we were going to build, but I moved to Brooklyn with this idea of, trying to take the playbook of Silicon Valley and using it to solve some of the challenges that Silicon Valley doesn't really focus on.
For sure. Yeah, I like that a lot. I feel like you touched on so many different important points there. But one specifically was people solve the problems that they understand. And so you're like just reflecting on your childhood to kind of live through something and then to be able to grow up and solve that issue. I think it comes back full circle, and it's just amazing how that works out. But what I wanted to ask on that note was, and you mentioned one piece there as well, like a lot of Silicon Valley and tech, kind of the culture around it doesn't have that demographic of people that we're talking about here. And so that's one area of it in terms of them, like the demographic just not understanding this issue. But poverty itself, it's such a big blanket. And I feel like that's existed for so long. So what other factors do you think have held back innovation and technological investments into solving this issue outside of just kind of like the demographic not fitting into that story?
Well, I think it's, to me, there are three factors that are top of mind. The first is the demographic issue that I outlined, which I don't want to like underestimate. It's really like the idea of like starting a technology company, if you know nothing about poverty, to like address poverty is like very far-fetched, right? If someone's gonna like you could be very well-meaning and read the New York Times and like know the stats around poverty, but to like get the level of conviction where you're ready to commit your life for years to like start a new thing that does that's like that takes a level of oftentimes personal experience for people to get excited about it. So that's number one.
Right.
Number two is historically access to technology. That like traditionally people who are low income in the United States or abroad didn't have access to smartphones, didn't have access to computers, had a harder time getting on the internet. And so the question was like, how do you reach these folks? Even if you wanted to build something, what's the distribution channel and how do you reach people at scale?
Right.
And that has largely been addressed in the United States and most of the Western world over the last like 5 or 10 years. In the United States now, something like 75% of people who receive food stamp benefits have a smartphone that is a data plan. And so, the way that I thought about this in the early days of the company is that these days, the challenge of technology not meeting its promise for low-income Americans is not a hardware problem. The hardware exists. People have the phones. People can get on the internet. The problem is mostly a software problem, which is that the phones don't have the applications and people haven't built the technology on the phones to actually solve the real problems that low-income people have. The third challenge is like somewhat of a tautological one, which is that people that are low income don't have a lot of money. And so it's not very profitable for-profit entrepreneurs and investors and companies to like go seek them out as customers. And like, it's obviously true, but at the same time, I think because a factor, the first factor, which is that people don't really have the lived experience of being low income, people I think underestimate how much money low income Americans actually do have. And it turns out that, there are 40% of Americans have fewer than $400 to pay for some unforeseen emergency. That's a lot of people, and they collectively have a lot of purchasing power. They collectively spend a lot of money, and they have a lot of needs around access to government services and banking and transportation and housing and healthcare and career services and so on and so forth. Like there are lots of businesses to be built, for-profit businesses. I'm not talking about building a charity that serves these folks. That there are business opportunities where there is an intersection between a way to build a large, very profitable business enterprise and also a way to build an organization that provides a really positive social impact. That I think people underestimate the business opportunity in serving low-income folks because they just gloss it over and say, well, these people don't have a lot of money. And so how am I going to build a business that serves them? It might be harder in many ways, right? In many ways, the low-hanging fruit is like making a luxury handbag or something and selling it for like 1,000x what the components cost. But that for low income Americans, there are lots of other characteristics of the market that actually make it a really attractive business opportunity. Very specifically that the incumbents tend to not be very good. That if you look at the daily experiences of somebody who's using the food stamp program in the United States, or someone who's making $20,000 and needing to use financial services, at every turn, their life is just less convenient than the average American's. The services that they use are less well designed. They are treated as a less respected patron or customer by most businesses that they walk into, and that's such a mistake. It's both like a bad thing from a humanistic standpoint of like, that's like really messed up that our society would do that, but also like from a business standpoint, like there are lots of these people do not have good experiences with the services that they spend thousands of dollars on. So that is a business opportunity.
For sure. And it's almost like it's like a vicious cycle, right? It's like you have someone who's in financial hardship, they can't help themselves, and then the businesses don't want to help them. And it's just like a circle of just, it's not going to work, right? So I like that your business was able to enter that space. And so can you give some context into how Propel is actually helping these demographics?
Yeah, so there are 40 million Americans who receive their food stamp benefits on EBT cards in the United States. So the food stamp program is a program that's funded by the federal government and state governments that allows anyone who makes under a certain amount of income to get a benefit that they can spend on food. So you spend it at grocery stores, it looks like a debit card, and you swipe it at the checkout just like you would swipe any other payment card, and it helps you to pay for food. These 40 million people get about approximately $70 billion in food stamp benefits each year. So it is a major driver of purchasing power for a lot of these households. The average person gets about $250 in food stamp benefits each month. And we started talking to people who get food stamps in the United States. By the way, the program's officially known as SNAP, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. Okay. We talked to a lot of people who get SNAP benefits in the United States. And one of the weird quirks that we found is that when you go shopping with an EBT card, the first thing you do is call the 1-800 number on the back of the card so you can check your balance. And that's because if you try to check out and you don't have enough in benefits left on your card, you're declined by the cashier and you get into this really embarrassing experience where everyone knows that you're trying to pay with food stamps and you don't have enough left.
Right.
And so people check their balance all the time. When I learned about that, like my very naive question was, well, this looks like a debit card. I have a debit card. I don't check my balance on my debit card by calling a phone number. I have a mobile banking app. And most major financial services companies in the United States, if you store your money with them, they give you a card. There's also a free app you can download that lets you see your balance and transaction history. So we asked why that didn't exist for the EBT card. And we couldn't find a good reason. And so we built one. It's called the Fresh EBT app. And it works kind of like a mobile banking app for the EBT card, in that it replaces that 1-800 number that you call with a free mobile app that lets you check your balance in just a few seconds. What Fresh EBT has really transformed into over the last few years is using the fact that every EBT cardholder needs to check their balance as a gateway to broader financial health.
Okay.
The average person who uses Fresh EBT opens the app about 17 times each month, because to my previous point, it's really important to check your balance and know how much you've got. We see that as 17 opportunities to not just help you understand, here's how much you have left on your card, but also to say, here are various other ways that you can save money or make more money. That at the end of the day, we're serving a consumer who doesn't have a lot of money. That's a common thing that all of our users have, is that they are struggling financially. And so we want to be a distribution platform and a way for that person to find, what are the other resources that help me to improve my financial life? So some of the other stuff that we show inside the app includes grocery coupons to help you save money when you go shopping. You can clip and use from inside the app. We work with a variety of telecoms carriers to help our users to get cheaper cell phone plans or cheaper home internet. We work directly with employers, large and small, to help our users find out who's hiring close to them and what kind of jobs they can qualify for. And so in this way, we really think about the Fresh EBT app as using the EBT balance checking thing as a hook towards greater financial health. So Fresh EBT is the core thing that my company builds. It's used by a little more than 3 million American households each month. It's been out in the world for about 4 years and just continues to grow. People continue to find it. It continues to be one of the most commonly used apps by low-income Americans in the United States.
For sure, yeah, and we had our stats at 2 million, and now you've hit 3. So your users are continuously growing. So what I want to understand from that is kind of, when you were testing that hypothesis, like in addressing these demographics, first to help them just view their balances, and then provide additional services. Like what was some of the findings that you were getting from this? What was the feedback that you were getting from the clients that were kind of onboarding this, something that was probably something brand new to them that's never existed?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we got right with Fresh EBT was latching on to an existing habit. I think it's hard to build habits.
Right.
It's hard to that's like the barrier that I think essentially all consumer apps have to overcome, is like, why is someone going to pull out their phone and open your app? Like, what is the thing that's going to nudge them to do that? And the reality is, if you think about the way that we all use our phones, there are probably not that many apps you use regularly. It's probably
Right.
not that many apps you use at least once a week, right? Maybe 5, maybe 10, maybe 15, depending on how you use your phone, but there's not that many. And breaking into that inner circle, it's really, really hard.
Right.
And so we overcame that by realizing that our users, the people we were trying to attract, already had a behavior. That behavior was calling the 1-800 number. And so we could just do that in a better way for them and save them time, but allow them to not have to call that phone number. Instead, they could do it from an app. And so that was like the early insight that I think led us to be able to grow Fresh EBT, for it to be an engaging product that people use frequently. And I think has been sort of the key ingredient to the successful app from like a consumer software perspective. A lot of the other features came just from the tried and true listening to our users.
Right.
Just talking to our users, understanding what challenges they face, and building features that would address those needs. So grocery coupons might sound obvious in retrospect, but we talk to our users, people who are using Fresh EBT, about their challenges, and they're like, yeah, well, one of my biggest challenges is that while I'm really grateful for the food stamp program, grateful for the help that I receive, it's not enough. I have trouble making it to the next month where my next deposit will come in, and so I have to stretch my benefits. It's hard to figure out how to make this money stretch throughout the entire month. And so while we aren't solving the problem of hunger by introducing coupons into our app, it is a way, a tangible, meaningful way for people to be able to save money by using the app, by clipping these coupons. And our users have clipped more than $30 million in grocery coupons inside of Fresh EBT now. And so we are making a tangible contribution to helping people stretch their benefits from one month to the next. Quite a few of the other features that we've built or partnerships that we have also come from just hearing about the needs that our users have, maybe outside of grocery purchasing, and trying to understand what it's like to try to pay a cell phone bill, or what are the challenges around paying your heating bill, and how do we help you with that? What are the companies out there that are offering services that can help with that?
For sure. And I think that your company is a prime example of just natural growth by solving a problem. And a lot of your users are probably just grateful for a new platform to be accessible for something that they do on a regular basis, which is probably non-traditional and completely, behind the times. So that solved that issue for them. But outside of that, like outside of the organic growth and kind of just listening to the feedback where your clients were telling you, hey, we need help budgeting, we need help with financial tips and things like that, you were able to incorporate that into the app, right? So outside of that, how else did you drive the growth from the user perspective? Just knowing that this demographic as well is probably not receiving these type of ads like typical technological products would.
Like targeting, yeah.
Yeah, and in fact, that is one of the core parts of our business and value proposition is that no other online platforms are aware that you're somebody who's low income and receiving food stamps, right? And that actually there are a number of products and businesses that really want to reach this consumer with things that are really positive to their financial health. For example, there are lots of programs you pre-qualify for because you're on food stamps. And so we can help be a really high signal marketing channel for those things. To answer your question though, well, to this day, we still get mostly organic traffic. So more than half of our users come from organic channels, whether that is people searching EBT app on Google or people telling their friends and family about this app. That continues to be the single biggest driver of growth. It always has been. And we hope it always will be, because I think that's a reflection that we're solving a real problem for people. And that, to your point, is that's got to be the starting point, right? There's no amount of marketing you can throw onto a product that's not solving a real need.
Right.
In the early days, we kickstarted growth by doing a number of kind of scrappy things, because you got to start the pinwheel somehow. We went to food stamp offices and handed out flyers. There are a bunch of food stamp offices near where I live in Brooklyn. And so we just stood out the door and handed out flyers to people. We tried the same thing in grocery stores. We got kicked out of those a lot. I previously worked at Facebook prior to starting Propel, and Facebook in my day gave all employees $250 per month to spend on ads. The idea was employees can test the ads platform by running their own ads. And so employees would often run really goofy ads just to try it out and see what it was like. I messaged a bunch of my friends who are still working at Facebook at the time and said, hey, can you donate your ad credit to me so that I can use it to run ads for this new Fresh EBT thing? I think we had a few $1,000s of ads credits from Facebook employees, and that ended up being a really critical part of how we were able to acquire users in the early days as well.
I really like that. Those are probably completely unconventional ways of just getting dollars from marketing. And I feel like you had that scrappy tendency to you. I like that story a lot. But so one thing I kind of get from this product and how it's helping consumers is that it's incorporating a government program to demographics that are kind of dependent on this a lot. And so what I wanted to pivot into understanding was, why do you think the government institutions in place don't actually have this technology? It's no secret that governments generally have severely outdated technology, whether that's even just filing taxes or anything like that. So what are some of the factors that are holding back these institutions from implementing this kind of change?
Well, I'll tell you what it's not. It's not a lack of caring about the problem or caring about the consumer, right? The government officials that we talk to are uniformly folks who are really committed to, they've committed their careers to helping people that are low income, running programs like the food stamp program. And so that's really not the problem. The problem that I noticed is that in many cases, so it's actually a couple of things. In many cases, it's actually not the government itself who builds the technology. So in the EBT program, for example, the government doesn't build the technology that people actually interact with. And this is true for a lot of government websites and forums too. Then in some cases, it's built by a literal federal employee, but in many cases, it's built by a contractor.
Right.
And so we started to look at why are these contractors not building more user-friendly products? And what we learned was more about the process by which a contractor becomes the one who's officially in charge of building a website or an app on behalf of the government, and just the hoops that you have to jump through, the requirements you have to satisfy in order to become the official app or the official website for a particular city or state. And that it's not that the contractors like have bad intentions necessarily, or that they're bad at building software necessarily. I think it's that at the end of the day, their customer is the government.
Right.
And if the government says like, here are 20 requirements, you've got to build an app that does these things, they're going to build an app that does those 20 things. And this is part of the reason why Propel's never been a government contractor. We don't make any money from the government. We don't want to build a business that is a government contracting business, because we want to ultimately be responsible to the user, to the end consumer, right? And like, there's a part of that that like also just keeps us honest, that if we were building the official food stamp app of California or something, that like the feedback cycle for government technology can be kind of long. The feedback cycle of like, well, if someone doesn't want to use your thing, like, I don't know, we like still got paid for it. Right. And like, I'm not going to lose the election because I built a bad website, probably. Whereas like in the private sector, in the business world, there's something that's kind of refreshing about like, look, we build the unofficial app for people on food stamps. We are not trying to be the official app for people on food stamps. And if it's not valuable to people, they don't have to use it. Like, no one's telling them that they have to use this app. And so if we do a crappy job, like, just no one's going to use our product, and then like we will fail as a business. And like, that's kind of how it should be, right? That like,
Sure.
that if you're not solving a need that consumers have, then they'll like go to something else that does. And so I think there, in that specific way, I think there's something that the private sector can contribute to government software that I think has been missing. And that tightening that feedback loop can be a really great way to build the thing that everyone involved, whether you work in the government, you work at a contractor, or you work at a company like Propel, really cares about, which is building really great services for consumers.
For sure. And to that point, do you think like from a government standpoint, from a political standpoint, and I don't mean to get too into politics here, but do you think they should have a bigger role in managing these capabilities? Or do you think, like you said, where it might muddy the waters a little bit, where politicians might be like, hey, I want to build something, but it might reflect badly on my next election campaign or something, so let's scrap it, something like that. Like, do you think government should be more involved, or do you think it's going to be kind of like a gray area that we don't want to enter?
I think government has its hands full already with a lot of the challenges that are going on, especially in a post-COVID kind of world. Human services agencies in particular are just overloaded right now. If you've seen any of the news around the unemployment program, it's kind of a similar story of like, people are just overloaded and they've got a lot to do. So I don't really think, I think things are being very hard for government to decide to do more in this area at the moment. I would say that for government services to improve, like from the point of view of somebody who uses government services as a consumer, I think people see that there's an opportunity to get an easier way to file your taxes, easier way to like get a new driver's license or get a visa or various other things like that. And I would say the path to getting there long-term is two things simultaneously. They need to run parallel. The first is that we need to get more technologists in government.
Right.
That's a very long-term play, but there are lots of organizations in the United States, groups like the U.S. Digital Service at the federal level, that are really focused on getting more technologists into leadership positions in government, because at the end of the day, you get a technologist in place, that's the person who's going to make the right choices and decisions around how to build core technology. That's one side of the coin. The other side of the coin is that like, there is an opportunity for private companies like Propel to step in and offer the things that we are good at, without necessarily becoming government contractors. So the government has historically played a role in creating markets, in building the infrastructure that allows entrepreneurs to build new organizations. And that is really what I think the role of the government is in many of these cases. It's not to like, you don't have to build the end-to-end solution for everything under the sun. It is that the government should recognize that like, there are things that the private sector could never do. Like, I could never raise $70 billion per year and give it to people that are in financial need, right? That is fundamentally the role of the public sector, to like collect taxpayer money and to have a program like the food stamp program to operate the social safety net, right? There are lots of part of that is not going to work in the private sector, just fundamentally. But I think when we think about the delivery of those programs, so the very last mile of like, what is it like to use the card that helps me to put food on the table for my family? Like, that's something the private sector is very good at. Private sector's got lots of experience building consumer apps building payment mechanisms. Like those are the things that the private sector can actually step in and be effective at. And I think that kind of partnership is really the one that allows consumers to ultimately get the best products and a government that actually feels really modern.
I think there's a really good comparison between the public and private sector. And it was a beautiful answer just because we have an amazing example of kind of understanding the lack of education from the technological sphere with government, where we saw Mark Zuckerberg testify in front of Congress, and he was explaining questions that like even we understood, but people in government were kind of like, how is this? How do you do this? How do you run this? Right? So there's definitely that room for educating the government or just providing a talent that is able to be in that position and provide some sort of expertise on that. So I like that a lot. And I think we should definitely advocate for that a lot more, especially in our government as well. Totally. So in other ways, with Propel kind of, and this is a term that I actually learned with kind of looking into your company, was civic technology, kind of helping the public through a corporation or through kind of these methods of I'm trying to find a word here, but these methods of kind of like the private sector helping the public. And so what other ways is Propel looking to enter the sphere, if any?
Well, let me throw you for a loop a little bit. I started Propel as a civic tech kind of organization, where I was really focused on government services and the food stamp program in particular, which is government service. Over the last few years, I've realized that we're not a civic tech company. We're really a fintech company. We're a financial services company. Because at the end of the day, the impact that I want to have on the world is around the finances of the people that we serve. Okay. It's less about the government program exactly, and less about government services as the ends. And like the ends that we care about is like ultimately financial health for low-income Americans, right? We want to see the change reflected in someone's wallet, in someone's bank account.
Right.
And so that's part of what has led us to do some things that I would say are non-traditional for a civic tech company. For example, building grocery coupons or building a way for people to find a job through our app. Like those are sort of non-traditional things for a civic tech company to do. But I think more in line with, at the end of the day, we care about the finances for our user. And we are willing to do things that are like traditionally in civic tech, like help them to navigate the safety net programs like food stamps. We're also willing to do things that are like way outside of the traditional civic tech sphere, in financial services, in government services, in employment, and so on. That's really the future of Propel, and where we're taking the company is less focused on the vertical of civic tech, or frankly, even on the vertical of financial services, and more on the horizontal of, this is the consumer that we serve. You know, the average person that we serve is a low-income single mother. It's about 85% of our users are female. About 87% have a child under the age of 18 at home. And what we are more interested in the long term is just learning more about her and continuing to find ways that we can be helpful to her life. And if that falls in civic tech, great. If that falls in fintech, also fine. We're agnostic about the sector and more focused on the individual.
Fair. So it's kind of like that transition from civic to now just fintech, and that's kind of like where your company took off then.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I can actually see that, because when I first looked at their website, it looked more like a traditional fintech application. So I really like the analogy in terms of how you're actually thinking of the holistic view of, impacting the end financial kind of means for the individual. So I totally align with that. And that kind of brings us to a great segue here, which is kind of looking at the actual technology you've implemented. So with any kind of application, especially within fintech specifically, you have to deal with sensitive data. And so what were the kind of challenges you faced in terms of dealing with the data, and how are you kind of consistently complying with rules and regulations around that to keep your users safe?
Yeah, we thought about this a lot before we even built the Fresh EBT application, and wanted to structure it from the ground up as something that really respected privacy. Because we know that this is a sad truth. A lot of low-income Americans are the target of scams. A lot of low-income Americans, their privacy is not respected. And the specific type of data that we could come into contact with, like very specifically, here's like so-and-so who gets food stamps, like that's like deeply personal. right? We don't want to ever be responsible for having a roster of Americans on food stamps or anything like that. So we have made a number of technical decisions inside the app that I think make us quite confident that we are doing the right thing by our users and that we are securing their data such that there's no chance of any misalignment of expectations. The core one is that we have to get certain types of personal information in order to use the app based on the way the back end of the app works by connecting into these state websites and portals. We often need to ask for information like, what's your EBT card number? And we made the decision early on, this has always been the case, that we don't save that information. So we store it on your phone in an encrypted file, which means that it never needs to be stored inside of our server. So there is no Propel employee that can say, hey, I want to pull the names of people on food stamps, or I want to see what their passwords or what their card numbers are. We literally don't have that data. And so like the highest form of security is just never collecting that data in the first place. And so we've just chosen to not collect the personally identifiable information of our users when it comes to the information they use to kind of sign into the app. Aside from that, there are lots of other things that we've done because, again, we've tried to build a company that really, really is respectful of the consumer and that holds her privacy quite dear. A key decision that we've always made is that we don't sell any of the data. We don't transmit any of the data to a third party besides what's needed to fulfill the core service that people sign up for. That we, just like not having a business incentive to like capture a lot of data, like really frees us up to like not have to worry about storing that kind of personal information. And so I think those are really some of the ways in which we really think about keeping people's data private and secure. Like we've got a couple of constituents here. Like first and foremost, we are answerable to the people who use the app, and we want to do right by them. I started a company to serve those people, and so if we were to lose people's data or compromise something, like that would be antithetical to the mission of the company. But another key constituent is government, right? We want the government to feel comfortable about the steps that we are taking to safeguard people's private information. And so a lot of that's been these kind of relationships that we've built with government. A lot of it's been these policies that we put in place where we're not storing data, we're encrypting everything, we're committing to not sell data. All those things I think are what have helped us to get to the point where we are now.
Sweet. And here's maybe a little controversial question. Has there been, like, we know like data is like the new oil and all companies use it in certain ways. Has there been any pushback and or limitations on your end for not having access to those specific pieces of data that you're not like using? And would that kind of almost allow you to be, say, accelerate your growth a little faster or whatever it may be? Has there been any kind of drawbacks around that?
Short term, yes, but long term, no. And I believe that like quite firmly. That yes, we could like make some money in the short term if we didn't have a policy that we couldn't sell data, or that we were just gonna like capture every piece of data we could find about our users and save it in a big database and then just like stare at it at night or something. But yeah, like there are probably like business opportunities or ways that we could like grow the company faster if we did that, but that would be optimizing for a very short term kind of payoff, because in the medium term, what's going to happen is that people aren't going to trust us. And the trust of our users is the most important currency that we have, right? That we want everyone who uses Fresh EBT to trust that we have their best interests at heart, that we are fully transparent about everything that we are doing and that we are planning to go do. And that's what allows us to help the person not just manage their food stamps, but also to save money and make more money through all these different services that we can recommend to them. So if we lose their trust and they think of us as just like some scammy app that I have to like navigate around all these minefields to trying to steal my data all the time, then we lose. We don't have a business in the medium term. We're not going to grow. And that's why it's the long term, like in the long term, it's the wrong business choice, not just the wrong choice from like a moral point of view, but the wrong business choice for us to go do that.
Yeah, I think that's powerful, because just understanding like your demographics, core value, and they probably value trust probably the most, because, you know, other companies, other institutions haven't really put trust back into them. And so creating an app and understanding fundamentally that trust is like your core foundation in terms of scaling and growth, I think that's super, super on point in terms of what you guys are doing. And also love the point of short-term, long-term. because a lot of people do think about the short term and forget about how that's going to impact the long term kind of trajectory of where your business is headed.
Yeah, and I think I'll just add to that, like we're fortunate to be supported by great investors who believe in that long term and that are here for the long term. They're not here to like try to make a quick buck off of us.
Yeah.
And we were fortunate to just like have really fantastic investors who understand that and who believe in sort of our strategy and building a long-term like play.
Yeah, and I think Jimmy, you're like a wizard here. You kind of basically got to my next question there about investors. So you do have a wonderful list of investors: Andreessen Horowitz, Kleiner Perkins, Kevin Durant's 35 Ventures, and also Serena Williams. So describe to me what the typical process is when you're looking to secure funds, and like especially in this case, since it's like you have a social cause attached to something, find investors that support your mission.
Yeah, we've always, like part of the reason why Propel is a for-profit company that raises money from these traditional investors is that I don't want to be judged by a different set of standards in terms of how good our business is. And that I think, accepting a lower rate of returns or accepting like having crappier metrics or growing less quickly as a social impact business is exactly the type of thing that's going to set the industry back, because I don't want investors to see social impact investments as having to sacrifice something, as having to, like I am going to like do this good thing, like, because it feels then more like charity. And then you'll ask yourself the question, well, why am I not just giving the money to charity? And so the specific, the shape of the business that I'm trying to build is one that is judged by the exact same types of goals and metrics that other for-profit businesses that don't have a social mission are judged by. And we want investors who are the same investors that like invest in other for-profit companies that don't have a social mission. And so our investors at Andreessen Horowitz and Kleiner Perkins are two of the most storied social, investors in Silicon Valley, who don't traditionally invest in social mission organizations, but the specific investors that we work with very much fundamentally understand that we are motivated by a mission and believe in this opportunity to build a business that doesn't compromise. Our process, I don't know that I have a like uniform process of finding investors, but I will say like one thing that always stands out to me as an entrepreneur is that I think investors who get it are few and far between. This actually goes back to the very first thing that I was talking to you guys about how like an understanding of poverty or of like not having enough money is a rare thing in Silicon Valley.
Yeah.
And it's especially rare among the people who hold the checkbooks, the venture capital investors. But there are people out there who do understand those challenges, who have some either a personal experience or have done something else that helps them to understand what those challenges are like. And I find that my conversations with people who understand that go just like very differently, right? It's like I don't have to explain the core things like low-income Americans have smartphones, or that like, if you're low income and you have kind of a scarcity mindset where you're constantly just trying to make it to the next day or to the next week, there are certain things that you look for and certain things that you prioritize. And so, certainly when I think about who we are seeking as investors, it's really people who've got some kind of part of their personal story that really draws them to our mission. And some of these celebrity investors we have, I think, also follow that trend. There are folks who, either through personal experience or something else, deeply connect with the story of what we were trying to build at Propel. And that's really important to us because it makes them really great spokespeople for us.
Yeah, and so describe to me what it's like having like a Kevin Durant and a Serena Williams really supporting your cause. Like, how's that kind of opened up doors for Propel and its growth?
Well, it's been an honor to have both of their. So, I mean, these are two of the top athletes in the world at what they do, and both of them connect to the Propel story in some way. I mean, in Kevin's case, it was growing up, in a low-income household and struggling to put food on the table, right? And getting to the point where now he's one of the biggest stars in the NBA. In Serena's case, it's that like I remember when I first spoke to her about Propel. She said, like, I was talking about how, like, actually a lot of our users are low income single moms. And Serena said, like, look, I am very well off financially now and like didn't have that kind of hardship growing up, but like grew up in Compton, like She was like, look, I recognize that like certain things could have gone bad for me in my life, and I could be someone who's using your app. Like, it's like she recognizes that like, just sort of the gap between people is just not that large. And so that I think has been really powerful for us. And having them talk about Propel on the platforms that they have, like whether that's social media or somewhere else, I think it's just been a big driver of just like people understanding that, the supporters of Propel are not just one type of organization or one type of person. It's not just one investor. It's not just one type of investor, but that we've been able to find people who believe in this mission from across a variety of sectors. And I think that has been powerful for us.
Yeah, I like that a lot because that's kind of led me into my next question regarding the generation that we're in, or at least our generation dealing with millennials. What we notice is that social initiatives are really a driving force in the economy in how millennials approach businesses and how millennials interact with businesses as well. And so your company having such a huge impact in this sphere, why do you think brands that are making a more social impact are receiving more attention and more? I don't want to make it seem like they're profiting off of it as a result of it, but they are kind of more successful in this sphere right now just because of what they're doing. Why do you think that is?
Well, if I can be like very theoretical for a second, I think there's a part of that that's like very exciting because I think in many ways our economy has gone a little bit off the rails where there are ways to make lots of money by doing something that produces no value to the world.
Right.
And I'm not going to call out any specific jobs or industries, but that, people can think of their own examples of those. Sort of in the like idealistic economy, the people who make the most money are the ones who create the most value, right? The people who like do the most like positive things that help others have a better life, right? Those are the people that ought to make the most money. That's what like the economy, that's how the economy should work fundamentally. And that's not how our economy works now. But I think the trend towards conscious capitalism, towards like using your money on things that align with your values, and things that maybe have a social impact beyond just, having the utility to you, I think is a great move in that direction, to getting closer to the type of economy and society that really tries to reward organizations that are having the type of change that people really care about.
And to that point, like you said, I think it's hard given our economy and what we're used to right now. If you want to start something with more of a social impact focus, there's so much red tape, or there's so many difficulties, whether you're dealing with venture capitalists or anything like that, to kind of just to use your company name to propel yourselves up there, right? So, like, can you give some advice for any new entrepreneurs who want to create something in this atmosphere? With social justice or anything like that, how they can succeed, and maybe you can lean in on your experience of building from this.
Yeah. So it's a little bit hard to give one size fits all advice because there are so many different ways that people can make an impact on the world. And if you're starting an environmental nonprofit versus you're starting a tech company that works on food insecurity, there's like very different types of hurdles you're gonna have to cross. And so I'm not sure that there's like a single piece of advice that's consistent across all those. I would say a couple of things that have come up in our journey that I would advise any aspiring entrepreneur to do. One is like think carefully about the governance structure of the organization. Are you a nonprofit? Are you a for-profit? Are you something else? Are you starting this? Like, why does this need to start as its own standalone organization as opposed to a project inside of a bigger company or nonprofit or something else? I would encourage social mission focused founders generally to recruit heavily based on that, and to accept that there are lots of people who will never work at your company because they don't care about that social mission, and that's got to be okay. And I think that's like maybe a little different than other companies that just like compete purely on salary, where it's just like, if I pay you a higher salary than what you're currently making, you'll come work for me. And like, that's how it works, right? That if you're a really a mission-based entrepreneur, you really like, one of the scariest things is hiring people who don't believe in the mission, who see themselves as mercenaries. And then instead you should fill your company with people who are truly missionaries, who care about the mission of the company, and that's what motivates them, and that's what gets them to come to work every day. Now, it's not that you should pay them, unfair wages or stiff them on other things, but it's that, like, what is the core motivating drive that they have? And it's got to be a belief in the mission.
And is that one of the biggest kind of hurdles that you have in hiring people, just understanding what drives them? Because I think a lot of people want to work for your company, but we want to understand, like, how do you pick those people? Like, how do you figure out that these are the ones that are going to stand for this mission?
Yeah, it's for us a combination of a fundamental belief in the mission. So it's one of the things we interview for, that we screen for, that like we don't want anybody who doesn't fundamentally believe in the mission of what we're doing, or like, you know, there are lots of like if you want to work for a cool startup, there are lots of cool startups out there. If you want to work for a company that's growing quickly, there are lots of companies that are growing. If you want to work for even a civic tech organization or a fintech organization, that's the core motivation. Like there are lots of those, right? Why should someone choose Propel among all the other options that they have? And it's got to be because that person fundamentally cares about the thing that we work on, which is building a better safety net, which is helping moms on food stamps, which is building the company that's going to materially make financial changes for that consumer. Aside from that, I mean, I think in many other ways, like my idea behind Propel was we wanted to apply a lot of the same tools and standards that Silicon Valley tech companies use to a social mission-based organization. So from a technology standpoint, that means we want the same types of technologists. A lot of our engineering team are people who've worked in other major tech companies and are bringing those skills to bear at Propel. Same is true like on the business team and on the product team, that we're looking for people that are incredibly talented in their fields. The last one is that we need to build a diverse team. And I think like everyone's thinking about diversity in all sorts of ways right now, but for Propel, it's like there's a different standard for it in the sense that like we serve like a diverse user base of people, right? We serve a lot of low income single moms. 40% of our users are Black, 20% are Latino and Latina. And it's just like, we just can't look like every other tech company out there if we want to be successful. It's not just because we're trying to be nice. It is that like a team full of people who look like any other tech company will not be successful building a product for the user base that we're trying to build it for. And so, you know, finding people who have personal experience with the food stamp program or with poverty, finding people who come from an underrepresented background, just so incredibly critical for us.
Yeah, and that brings us...
you guys, I apologize. I've got to run in just like one more minute.
Okay, yeah, we can close off. So we'll do a quick lightning round here. Again, Jimmy, we really appreciate you being on here. So let's just we'll ask 3 questions just to shorten it up. Favorite book of all time?
The Financial Diaries. Maybe not the sexiest answer, but written by a friend of mine, and one of the things that changed my thinking on the financial lives of low-income people.
Sweet. And who's been the biggest influence on your career thus far?
I don't know that there's been a like single one person, but if I had to pick one, I would actually say probably my first boss out of college. Okay. He hired me as like a junior product manager out of school with no experience. He's the VP of product at LinkedIn, and just taught me, like, set a lot of the foundations for how I think about product and building technology and like what things really matter.
Sweet. And one of our most controversial questions we always ask our guests is yay or nay for pineapple on pizza?
Yay. Hard yay.
Yes.
All right. Sweet.
We have a disagreement here, but it's okay. Yeah. I like it.
All right. Sweet, man. Again, Jimmy, thank you for being on. We appreciate it, and look forward to staying in touch.
Thank you so much.